you. How are you? So I guess that when you were in school and you were children and everybody starts asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? Did anybody raise the hand and say, I want to be a philanthropist, or I want to work in social responsibility? Anyone? No. That happens all the time in every class that I give. This is a profession you normally stumble upon, and where you start finding there's interest, there are ideas that you start picking along the way and realize you play a role in the social impact that you make. And I studied social studies and education, and I also felt a cringe, like a pain, a stomach ache, when I saw injustice, when I saw hunger, when I went through environments that showed me that child's rights were not in place, or you go through a Me Too movement myself. And that's where you think there's something I could do. And at some point, along decades of the work that I've been doing, personally living my mission, my personal mission, which is to make a social impact, I've realized that at this point in humanity, as Lloyd Webber would say in The Phantom of the Opera, we are at a point of no return. A point in which the disparities, the inequalities are unsustainable, in which we feel that we can't understand why still at this day and age human rights are not respected. And kids are going through situations that nobody would fathom to go through. And that's where I go back to, why did I study social studies and education? And maybe it was to understand at this point the similarities that I feel there are between the French Revolution and the actual Fourth Industrial Revolution that we're living through. Crazy Jennifer's idea, you would say. Yeah, probably. But think about this. The French Revolution was about a movement. It wasn't a political party, it was a movement. And like Eric Hobsbawm would say, it was about the old regime and a new force. And this movement was about the inequalities between the nobles and the commons. And Eric Hobsbawm would also say and talk about the dual revolution. He would talk about how the French Revolution created an enlightenment, created a new social thinkers, created a new ideas around democracy, around nationalism, about liberty. And most of you might know the French Revolution big mottos were liberty, equality, and dignity. And then Eric Hobsbawm explains how the Industrial Revolution that came shortly after infused those ideas with the technology and with the economies it created. So when I'm thinking about that French Industrial Revolution and the actual Fourth Industrial Revolution, I'm thinking how at this day and age, those ideas are meaningful still now. How I hope that this Fourth Industrial Revolution will come with a social commitment, with a social movement that will also inspire us to think again about that liberty, that dignity, and that equality. We know, and last World Economic Forum shared some numbers about how the $500 billion made by billionaires in 2017 could end poverty now. When we know that 3 billion people live in poverty, 767 million people live below the poverty line with $1.90 a day. So that is a mathematical possibility, right? It's not a social, political, or historical possibility. But it makes us think about changing this, which is an imperative for our planet and our world to be sustainable, changing these inequalities. And I think it's an imperative for all. When we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, I don't want to take for granted that all of you know exactly what it is. It's about the fast pace and exponential rate that industries are changing, either physically, biologically, or digitally. And I'll give you a quick example of how this compares to the past. This is a corner in New York, the Flatiron Building, and this is, oh, this is not it yet, how it looked when the industry was about the blacksmith, the horse's food, the horse's care, the carriages, the carpenter who did the wheels. This was a whole industry. Come a few decades later, there are no horses left in the same corner. What happened with those farmers? What happened with those blacksmiths? They had to transform themselves to become mechanics, care for the cars. And just to give you a glimpse of how this fourth industrial revolution now is also going to impact in the transformation of the future of work. And when we look at that rapid transformation of technology impacting our lives, we know that it is an opportunity for those farmers to change their professions, for example, but there's also a risk of leaving billions of people behind. Part of my work as in Microsoft Philanthropies is exactly to focus in our mission about empowering people. And that mission we live through our work to empower people, to invest in communities, and to look after our planet. But focusing on the empowering people to ensuring that nobody's left behind, we focus on something very specific that has to do with our know-how, which is digital skills. And digital skills is not just about the digital literacy that billions of people still need to have, but it's also about computer science. So how we become not only users of technology, but creators of technology. And here in the UK, it's a privilege, right? Computer science is part of the education from kinder to high school, to secondary school. But that's not the reality in most of the world. We work around computer science policy to ensure that countries are including computer science as part of the education curricula. Most importantly, we work to include girls. Many of you know, for example, that the girls were the first coders. Women were the first coders. After the Second World War, men came back, oh, these ladies are just typing. And they got out of those career paths that was there for women. And now things happen, like the AC is created and we all women freeze. I always joke that I work for Microfrost because I freeze all the time. Women were not part of those engineer groups that created the air conditioning. And it was built according to the body mass, height, and weight of men. Same thing with crash dummies. I always ask this question, say, why do you think women were more injured in car accidents? And we women always play the guilty thing. Oh, because we were chatting, or because we were distracted. No, just don't blame yourself. No, because the crash dummies were created by a group of men engineers that built the dummy according to men's height and weight. So when you tested the cars, boom, boom, crash dummies, of course they were okay. But when a woman was driving, she would get injured. Until a woman joined the team, and then the crash dummies also included our height, our weight. So these little things that seem, just examples, is what happens when we are not inclusive of women in learning computer science. Just coding, learning how to code. I want to tell you about Wanderson. Wanderson is a Brazilian teen who was dealing with drugs, and he ended up in a juvenile institution for some years, in and out, from a favela in Rio. And he found that learning digital literacy and computer science in that institution gave him his passport out. And now he's paying it forward. He's teaching kids all around the country how to learn computer science. And he always talks about have fire in your eyes for what you do. But the story about Wanderson is that the guard told him, all of you kids that are dealing with drugs, you should all be dead. When he was out a year later and teaching others, he said, can you please teach me? The guard had no digital skills, nor could he ever think about creating any computer science solution. So this work has to be very aligned with when we look at the United Nations mission around the Sustainable Development Goals. But this is not a United Nations mission. It's everybody's mission. It's a business imperative. It is a personal imperative for all of us to ensure that the world is sustainable by 2030. There are dire consequences if these goals are not achieved. Many of you might know them, but I want you to reflect on which one of them are more dear to you. Gender equality, as you can imagine, is one which I'm very committed with, as well as quality education. Ensuring quality education will have the most of the impact in all of the other sustainable development goals. And of course, goal 16 on peace and how we ensure that refugees, 65 million refugees and displaced people, have the skills and the opportunities to be included in this future of work and the fourth industrial revolution. Many people actually fear the fourth industrial revolution. To me personally, it gives me hope. It gives me hope that we think again about that liberty, equality, and dignity, and that the fourth industrial revolution, it's not just a technology revolution. It is a revolution about people, about a better place for people with less inequalities, with a better distribution of wealth, with a less concentration of wealth. 5 billionaires now have the wealth of 50% of the planet. And that doesn't make any sense to me. This concentration of wealth is unsustainable. It's unsustainable for our future. So I hope this fourth industrial revolution comes with a movement like did the French Revolution. Some people are talking, like Yunus, about social businesses. Others are talking about capitalism, as contradictory as it seems. It isn't. Philanthropies is about the love for humanity. Anybody can be a philanthropist, not only just a wealthy person. Anybody can be socially responsible. Being socially responsible is not about, oh, the company does it, my school does it. And if your company doesn't do it, your school doesn't do it, what? It's about each one of us embracing that role, understanding we play a role in enabling a future that is for everyone, a future that is inclusive, a future in which we think, and hopefully a present, that wages have to be democratized, that the disparities between what a CEO earns and an intern earns can't be have such a gap, in which stocks have to be redistributed. And I'm just giving some ideas. I'm not saying that's what all of us will collectively make happen, but we have to use our collective intelligence, our collective action to rethink how do we want this fourth industrial revolution to be. And I'm inviting you to do two things to be part of this fourth industrial revolution, personally. First of all, if you haven't, maybe many of you do here, but many of us don't, young or senior, learn the basics of computer science. Understand there is a new alphabet. Farmers would say, oh, why do I need to read and write when I'm just planting a seed and harvesting? And that's where we had literacy problems in the past. So learn the new alphabet, take an hour of code, learn the basics of computer science. That will enhance logical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, and above all, creativity. Creativity will not ever be replaced by machine learning or artificial intelligence. In fact, if we think about artificial intelligence, we have to think about it the same way we're thinking about our social responsibility role. It has to be ethical, it has to be democratic, but it has to be sustainable. And of course, ensure our privacy. So that's my first invitation for you to learn computer science if you haven't. I learned, and I don't come from a techie background. Anybody can learn a new alphabet. And the second thing I'd like to invite you to do is to think about those sustainable development goals and pick one that is dear to your heart, one that you can embrace, and one that you can embrace and then pay forward and say, I'll do something that I can make an impact by 2030, because every decision that you make every day really counts. It does make a difference. And maybe many of you have not watched The Matrix. It's an old movie, you would say. But Neo, the main character, had two options. He had to drink the blue pill and continue living in that status quo, or he could drink the red pill and see reality differently. I'm inviting you to drink the red pill, to challenge yourselves to think, and think together, all of us, how we can make the fourth industrial revolution to be a revolution for the people, to be sustainable, to think about that collective action. It does make a difference when you decide one day not to use makeup that is tested through a company that does animal testing. It's not the same the day that you decide not to use a straw, not to use a plastic bag. It's not the same the day that you decide to volunteer a few hours in your community. It's not the same. It's not the same when you speak up. So that's my challenge for you, to be a force for humanity and to be a force for good. Thank you so much.